My mom is a housekeeper at a luxury hotel. I found her collection. She steals strands of hair from famous guests for paternity tests. The box was tucked away in the highest, most forgotten corner of her closet, behind a stack of threadbare towels and a winter coat she hadn't worn in years. It smelled like dust and cedar and secrets. I was only up there because I needed my birth certificate for a financial aid application, and she told me, without looking up from the sink full of dishes, but it was in a memory box somewhere in her room. This felt less like a memory box and more like a crypt. It was a plain cardboard shoebox, the brand name faded into an illegible smudge. My fingers trembled a little as I lifted the lid, expecting to find my first baby shoes or a lock of my own blonde hair from my first haircut. Instead, I found them. Dozens of tiny Ziploc bags, the kind you'd use for beads or buttons, laid out in neat, obsessive rows. Inside each bag was a single strand of hair. Some were dark and coarse, others were fine and light, a few were a startling shade of red. But it wasn't the hairs that made the air in my lungs turn to ice. It was the labels. Each bag was marked with a piece of masking tape, and on each piece of tape was a name and a date written in my mother's tight, meticulous cursive. The same cursive from the grocery lists on the fridge and the birthday card she always left on my pillow. But these weren't family names. They were names I knew from movie posters, from the covers of magazines I'd thumbed through while waiting in line at the supermarket. Actors, musicians, a politician I vaguely recognized. And the dates all fell within a 9-month window, 19 years ago. My world, which had always been a small, predictable place, our cramped 2-bedroom apartment, the hum of the ancient refrigerator, the scent of bleach that always clung to my mom's clothes, suddenly tilted on its axis. My mother is a ghost. She moves through the world, and especially through her job at the Archfield Hotel, by being unseen. She's the quiet woman who empties your trash, replaces your towels, and straightens the duvet, all without leaving a trace of her own presence. She prides herself on her invisibility. The idea of her, my quiet, unassuming mother, carefully lifting a stray hair from a pillow or a bathroom drain, placing it in a baggie and labeling it with a stolen pen, it was impossible. It was a violation. It was the act of someone I didn't know at all. I sank down to the floor, the box resting in my lap, the worn carpet pressed into my knees. I could hear the traffic from the street below, the familiar soundtrack to my life. Everything was the same, but my own history was suddenly a collection of question marks, sealed in cheap plastic. For my entire life, the story was simple. My father was a man she'd loved briefly, a man who didn't stick around, a man whose name she never spoke. It was a sad, short story, and I had learned not to ask for more. I thought it was about protecting her from a painful memory, but this box told a different story. This wasn't the story of a forgotten love. This was a methodical, almost scientific investigation. A hunt. My fingers brushed over one of the bags near the top. The label read, Julian Vance. I knew that name. He was an actor, one of those guys who was huge in the late 90s and early 2000s, with intense blue eyes and a reputation for being difficult on set. My mom had once pointed him out in an old magazine, her face unreadable, and said, he always requested extra towels, a terrible tipper. That was it. No sign of recognition, no flicker of a shared past, just a housekeeping anecdote. But here he was, in her box. A single dark brown hair, curled against the plastic, dated October, about 9 months before I was born. My hand was shaking so hard I had to set the bag down. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a collection. It was a list of candidates. And I was the prize. My own name wasn't in the box. I checked. My fingers, clumsy and numb, sifted through the plastic bags, the slight crinkle of each one a gunshot in the quiet of the closet. I was looking for a bag labeled with my name, containing a lock of my own hair, something to prove this was a mother's memory box, however strange and twisted. But there was nothing. There was only them. A rock star whose poster I'd had on my wall in middle school. a novelist who'd done a reading at the local library a few years back that my English class had attended, a celebrity chef, each one a potential genesis. The thought was so bizarre, so fundamentally alien, that a laugh bubbled up in my throat, a hysterical, choked sound that I had to swallow back down. My life wasn't a story, it was a multiple-choice question, and my mother was the one who had circled all the answers. I pulled out another bag. Rory Flynn, the lead singer of a band that had imploded from drug use and infighting more than a decade ago. His hair was almost white blonde, thin and wispy. The date was from August, 7 months before I was born. I remembered a documentary about him. He had a daughter he'd never met. The tabloids had dragged her through the mud a few years ago when she tried to claim part of his estate. Was that me? Could that have been me? I felt a wave of nausea roll through me, hot and acidic. I wasn't just a daughter. I was a potential lawsuit, a PR nightmare, a secret that could unravel a carefully constructed celebrity life. My mother hadn't just been looking for a father, she had been weighing options, calculating odds, appraising the market value of my very existence. The love story she'd fed me, the sad, simple tale of a man who left, was a kindness compared to this. This was cold. It was a business transaction. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. My heart seized in my chest, a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I froze, the box clutched to my stomach, my back pressed against the wall. The light from under the closet door was momentarily blocked by a shadow. My mother. She was just outside. I could hear the soft scuff of her slippers on the worn linoleum, a sound that meant comfort and safety my entire life. Now it was the sound of my jailer doing her rounds. I held my breath, praying the ancient hinges on the door wouldn't betray me, praying she wouldn't suddenly remember something else she needed from the closet. I could picture her out there, her face etched with the familiar lines of fatigue, her hands probably smoothing down her apron. The woman who made me soup when I was sick and quizzed me on my history homework. The same woman who curated a Rolodex of potential fathers from the discarded DNA of rich men. The shadow moved on. I heard the refrigerator door open and close in the kitchen, the clink of a glass. I stayed perfectly still for another minute, my muscles screaming in protest. The air in the closet was thick with the smell of mothballs and my own panicked sweat. The person I had to confront wasn't a stranger. She was the one person in the world I was supposed to trust implicitly. How do you ask your own mother if you were a lottery ticket she was hoping would pay out? The question felt like a shard of glass in my mouth. I looked down at the box, at the neat rows of men who had slept in a bedsheet made, who had shed a single, unnoticed part of themselves that she had claimed as a clue. I knew I couldn't leave the box here, but I couldn't take the whole thing either. It was too big, too obvious. She would know. My eyes landed back on the first bag I'd touched. Julian Vance, the actor with the intense eyes, the terrible tipper. His name felt more real than the others, anchored by that one small throwaway anecdote. It was a starting point. With a decision that felt both like a betrayal and the only possible way forward, I slipped his baggie out of the box and tucked it deep into the pocket of my jeans. The small, square packet felt heavy, like a stone. I placed the lid back on the box, my movements slow and deliberate, trying to mimic the exact way I had found it. I pushed it back into its dusty corner, behind the towels and the old coat, burying the secret all over again. Then I stepped out of the closet, closing the door with a soft click, and walked toward the sound of my mother in the kitchen, my face arranged into a mask of perfect, untroubled normalcy. She was standing at the sink, her back to me, rinsing a glass. The water ran, a soft, steady sound that did nothing to quiet the frantic drumming in my ears. The fluorescent light above the stove hummed, casting a pale, sterile glow over the familiar scene. The chipped formica countertop, the magnet shaped like a chili pepper holding up a grocery list, the slight slump of her shoulders and her worn-out cardigan. For 20 years, this view had meant home. Now it felt like the set of a play where I'd just been handed a new script and everyone but me had known their lines all along. The small plastic square in my pocket seemed to burn against my thigh, a tiny ember of a truth that could incinerate everything I thought I knew. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to make my breathing even. "Hey," I said. My voice came out sounding thin, reedy. She turned, a small smile touching her lips as she saw me. "Oh, there you are. I didn't hear you come in." Her eyes, the same brown as mine, scanned my face. They were tired, netted with fine lines from years of early mornings and harsh cleaning chemicals. But they were kind. That is the part that felt like a physical blow. How could those eyes hold such a cold, calculating secret? "Everything okay, sweetie? You look a little pale." She dried her hands on a dish towel, her movements efficient and practiced. She was always in motion, always cleaning, mending, organizing, a life spent tidying up the messes of others. And, I now realized, tidying up her own. "Just tired," I managed, forcing a weak smile. "Long day." I walked over to the fridge and pulled out the carton of orange juice, my actions a desperate pantomime of routine. I needed something to do with my hands. "I was just grabbing a blanket from the hall closet. It's getting cold in here." The lie felt clumsy on my tongue, but she just nodded, her attention already shifting to the pot of soup simmering on the back burner. "I'm making that lentil soup you like," she said, lifting the lid to stir it. The aroma of garlic and thyme filled the small kitchen. It was my comfort food, the meal she made whenever I was sick or sad or overwhelmed. The gesture was so automatic, so motherly, it made my stomach twist into a knot of guilt and rage. Was this love or was it maintenance? Was she feeding her daughter or was she protecting her investment? The plastic baggie in my pocket felt heavier. I took a long swallow of juice, the cold acidity a shock to my system. I had to know. I had to see her face. I leaned against the counter, trying to sound casual. "You know, it's funny. I saw this old movie on TV the other day, one of those cheesy action flicks from way back. It had that guy in it, Julian Vance." I watched her. I watched every muscle in her face, every flicker of her eyes. For a split second, the wooden spoon in her hand stilled its circular motion in the pot. It was a pause so infinitesimal that a day ago I would never have noticed it. But now it was a seismic event. Her eyes didn't leave the soup. "Oh, him," she said, her voice perfectly even. She resumed stirring. "I remember him. He stayed on the penthouse floor once, left his room a complete disaster, smoked like a chimney even though it was a non-smoking suite." She said it with the same detached air she used for any housekeeping anecdote, the same tone she had mentioned him before, the terrible tipper. But the pause. The pause had been real. I had seen it. It was the crack in the mask, the proof that the name meant more than just another messy guest. She turned from the stove and looked at me again, her expression softening. "You should get some rest. You've got that big exam on Friday, don't you?" The concern in her voice was a weapon, disarming me, making me feel small and paranoid. I was the crazy one, rifling through closets, inventing conspiracies. I nodded, unable to speak. I couldn't stay in this kitchen, couldn't breathe the air thick with the smell of my favorite soup and her suffocating lies. I had to get out. "Yeah, you're right," I said, rinsing my glass and placing it in the dishwasher. "I think I'll just go for a walk, clear my head a bit before I try to study." Her brow furrowed slightly. "It's late, honey." "I won't go far," I insisted, already backing out of the kitchen. "Just around the block. I need the air." I didn't wait for her to argue. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door, pulled on my sneakers, and fled. The apartment door clicked shut behind me, and I leaned against it in the dim hallway, my chest heaving. I had the proof. A single hair, a name, and a pause. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a thread I could pull. I pushed myself off the door and ran down the 3 flights of stairs, skipping 2 at a time, bursting out into the cold night air. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows on the pavement. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. Not yet.
not until I had an answer that was my own. My lungs burned with the cold, sharp air. I didn't stop running until a stitch in my side pulled taut, forcing me into a limping walk. I was blocks from home, on a street I barely recognized, surrounded by the sleeping faces of brick apartment buildings. Each lit window was a small square of a life I knew nothing about. A family sitting down to a late dinner, a student hunched over a book, a couple arguing in muted tones. They were all blissfully, infuriatingly normal. I leaned against a cold iron fence, catching my breath, and pulled the plastic baggie from my pocket. Under the orange glow of a streetlight, the single dark hair was almost invisible, a fragile question mark sealed in plastic. It looked like nothing. It felt like everything. I had run from the smell of lentil soup, from the quiet hum of the refrigerator, from the soft, concerned look in my mother's eyes. That look was the most terrifying thing of all. It was the armor she wore, the perfect camouflage for the stranger living inside her. I started walking again, aimlessly, my sneakers slapping a rhythm against the concrete. The city was a blur of noise and light, a constant hum that usually felt like energy, but now just felt like static, interfering with the one clear channel in my head, the pause, the way her hand had stopped stirring. It was the only tell, the only proof I had that I wasn't losing my mind. Every kind word she'd ever said to me, every sacrifice she'd ever made, now felt suspect. The years of working double shifts to afford my school bucks, the nights she'd stayed up with me when I was sick, the way she always saved the last corner brownie for me. Was any of it real? Or was it all a performance, a long, drawn-out act of misdirection to keep me from ever looking in the right closet? The thought was so ugly, so monstrous, that it made me feel sick. I shoved my hands deep into my jacket pockets, my knuckles brushing against the sharp corners of the baggie. I needed a plan. I couldn't just wander the streets all night. A neon sign for a 24-hour coffee shop blinked a block ahead, a beacon of harsh, artificial light. It would do. I pushed through the glass door, a little bell announcing my arrival to the nearly empty space. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant.
A bored-looking kid with headphones around his neck took my order for a black coffee I had no intention of drinking. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth in the back corner, the one furthest from the door, and placed the warm cardboard cup on the table. Then I took out my phone. My hands were trembling slightly as I typed paternity test into the search bar. The results flooded the screen, an overwhelming wall of slick, clinical-looking websites with stock photos of smiling, happy families. Peace of mind DNA, fast, confidential results, legal and non-legal testing. It was a whole industry I never knew existed, a hidden world that ran on secrets and suspicion. My world, now. I clicked on the first link. The process seemed deceptively simple. Order a kit, swab your cheek, mail it back. But I didn't have a cheek to swab. I had a hair. I refined my search. Paternity test with hair sample. The information became more complex, more daunting. I needed the root, the follicle. Without it, the hair was useless. My heart sank. I held the baggie up to the dim light, trying to see. Was there a tiny bulb at the end, a speck of skin? I couldn't tell. It was just a hair. Even if it had the root, the website spoke of chain of custody for legal results and warned that non-standard samples incurred extra fees. And the fees. My breath caught in my throat. $300, $400, $599 for an expedited complex analysis. It might as well have been $1 million. I had $43 in my bank account until my next paycheck from the bookstore. I slumped back in the booth, the coffee growing cold in front of me. It was a dead end, a locked door with a price tag I couldn't possibly afford. I had the key, this tiny piece of Julian Vance, but I couldn't pay the toll to see what it opened. For a moment, I just wanted to go home, to crawl into bed and pretend I'd never opened the closet door. I could throw the baggie away, delete my search history, and go back to believing the simple story of my life. But I couldn't. the pause. I couldn't unsee the pause. My mother's face floated in my mind, her brow furrowed with that performance of concern. I couldn't live with that anymore. I scrolled numbly through my contacts, not knowing what I was looking for. And then I saw her name, Maya. Maya wasn't a close friend, not really. We'd been lab partners in AP Bio for a year in high school and shared a few classes now in college. She was terrifyingly smart, pragmatic to a fault, and currently pre-med, drowning in organic chemistry and genetics textbooks. She did not do drama, she did data. She once explained the Krebs cycle to me with such brutal efficiency that I felt like I'd been assaulted with knowledge. She would see this not as a family crisis, but as a problem of sample viability and funding. She was the only person I could think of who might know how to navigate this without dissolving into a puddle of emotions. My thumb hovered over her name. Telling someone, anyone, would make it real. It would be a betrayal of a different kind, inviting a stranger into the wreckage of my family. But the silence was suffocating me. I took a deep, shaky breath, the acrid coffee smell filling my lungs, and I started to type. Hey, I know this is random, but I have a weird genetics question. You busy? My finger hovered over the screen, a millimeter from the unsend button. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. What was I doing? I was about to pour the foundation of my entire life, the secret I'd carried for less than an hour, into a text message to a person who organized her bookshelf by the Dewey Decimal System. It was insane. My phone buzzed in my hand, the vibration shooting up my arm. Her name appeared at the top of the screen. She was already typing. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, "Who is this?" or simple dismissive question mark. But her reply was pure Maya. Define weird, and I'm always busy. What is it? I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It wasn't a dismissal, it was an invitation to be efficient. I fumbled with my reply, my thumbs feeling clumsy and slow. It's complicated. Better in person. Are you anywhere near campus? I knew it was late, past midnight, but I also knew Maya's study schedule was nocturnal and fueled by a terrifying amount of caffeine. The 3 dots appeared again almost instantly. I'm at the 24-hour library. Give me 15 minutes. Don't order the coffee here. It tastes like battery acid. I stared at the message, a strange wave of relief washing over me. She was coming. The secret was no longer just mine. The thought was both a comfort and a new kind of terror. I had lit a fuse, and now I couldn't stomp it out. I just had to wait for the bang. The 15 minutes felt like a lifetime. I watched the door, my leg bouncing under the table, every person who entered making my stomach clench. Then the little bell jingled, and she was there, a stark silhouette against the wet street outside. Maya moved with a kind of focused intensity, as if the air itself had to get out of her way. She wore a faded university sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she carried a backpack that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on me in the back corner. There was no smile, no wave, just a brisk nod as she navigated the empty tables and slid into the booth opposite me. She dropped her backpack onto the vinyl seat with a heavy thud. "Okay," she said, her voice low and direct as if we were picking up a conversation from 5 minutes ago. "The weird genetics question. Go." She looked at me, her gaze analytical, and I suddenly felt like a specimen under a microscope. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The whole story felt absurd, like something out of a daytime talk show, not something that happened to me, to my quiet life, to my mom who smelled like clean laundry and made lentil soup. My hands started to tremble again. I slid them under the table, pressing them against my knees. "It's not just a question," I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a thing, a sample." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small plastic baggie, placing it on the table between us. It looked pathetic and flimsy under the harsh fluorescent lights. Maya leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She didn't ask what it was. She didn't recoil. She simply observed it, her head tilted slightly. Then she looked back up at me, waiting. And so I told her. The words came out in a rush, a jumbled, whispered confession. The closet, the box, the labeled bags of hair. My mom, Julian Vance. the pause while stirring the soup. By the time I finished, my cheeks were wet and I was breathing in ragged little gasps. Maya was silent for a long moment. She didn't offer condolences or express shock. She simply picked up the baggie, holding it carefully by the edges. She pulled her phone out, turned on the flashlight, and held it under the hair, examining it with an unnerving stillness. "There might be a follicle," she said completely neutrally. "It's small, but it looks like there's tissue. That's good." She put the baggie back down on the table. "The cost is your main obstacle, obviously, and the chain of custody. No lab will give you a legally admissible result from a sample you hand them in a Ziploc. You know that." I nodded numbly, wiping my eyes with the back of my sleeve. "I know, I have to know." "Even if it's not legal, I just need to know if it's true." She leaned back, crossing her arms. For the first time, a flicker of something other than clinical detachment crossed her face. It wasn't pity, it was calculation. Her eyes unfocused for a second, staring at the wall behind me as if she were running a complex equation in her head. "A commercial lab is out," she said, more to herself than to me. "Too expensive, too many questions. But the university lab, Dr. Albright's genomics lab, has a sequencer. It's mostly used for fruit fly DNA, but it's a high-throughput machine. It wouldn't even notice an extra sample in a batch run." My heart stuttered. "What are you saying?" Maya leaned forward again, her dark eyes locking onto mine. "I'm saying," she whispered, a conspiratorial edge to her voice, "that I have a key card to the lab. I'm a research assistant. We'd need a reference sample from you, a cheek swab, and we'd have to extract the DNA from the hair ourselves, without a proper kit. It's risky. If we get caught, I'm expelled. You're probably in trouble too. And the results wouldn't be a neat little 99.9% probability printout. It would be raw data, just long strings of base pairs. But I could analyze it. I could find the markers. I could tell you." She held my gaze, her expression unreadable. "So, do you want to break into a multi-million-dollar genetics lab with me?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible. It wasn't a real question, it was a dare, a precipice. I looked from her dead serious eyes to the pathetic little baggie on the table, this flimsy piece of plastic holding the potential to either detonate my life or defuse the bomb that was already ticking inside me. My entire existence had been rerouted in the last few hours, sent careening down a dark, unlit road, and Maya was offering me a flashlight and a hand-drawn map. It was a reckless, insane plan, built on a foundation of felonies and academic misconduct, but it was also the only plan I had. The silence in the coffee shop felt absolute, broken only by the hum of the drink cooler. I gave a single sharp nod, the motion feeling jerky and foreign, as if my head belonged to someone else. "Yes," I said, and the word came out as a ragged exhale, the sound of surrender. Maya didn't smile or look relieved. She simply nodded back, as if I had just agreed to pass her the salt. She skipped up the baggie, tucked it securely into an inner pocket of her backpack, and headed for the door without a backward glance, trusting I would follow. I scrambled out of the booth, my legs feeling unsteady. Outside, the night had grown colder. A fine mist hung in the air, blurring the edges of the streetlights and giving the empty campus an ethereal, dreamlike quality. We walked in silence, our footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. Maya set a brisk pace, her focus aimed forward, while I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, my heart seizing at every distant car engine or flicker of movement in the shadows of the old brick buildings. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, caught between a past that was a lie and a future that was a terrifying unknown. The genomics building was a newer construction of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the Gothic architecture of the older parts of campus. It looked inert and sleeping, every window dark except for a few low-level emergency lights. Maya didn't hesitate. She walked straight to a side entrance, swiped her student ID against a small black panel, and a quiet click echoed in the stillness. The heavy door swung inward, revealing a corridor bathed in the sterile blue-white glow of motion-activated lights. The air inside was different, cool, dry, and smelling faintly of ozone and disinfectant. It was the smell of science, of secrets being methodically unraveled. My own secret felt clumsy and dirty in this pristine environment. We moved through silent hallways, our sneakers squeaking softly on the polished linoleum, until we reached a door labeled Albright Laboratory, authorized personnel only. Another swipe, another click, and we were in. The lab was a cavern of shadows and blinking lights. Long, black-topped benches were cluttered with complex-looking equipment, and the air hummed with the sound of refrigeration units and ventilation fans. It felt like the bridge of a silent, subterranean ship. "Okay," Maya whispered, her voice barely disturbing the mechanical chorus. "First, you." She pulled a small, sealed packet from a drawer and handed it to me. It was a long cotton swab. "Cheek cells. Swab the inside of your cheek for 30 seconds. Don't be gentle." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear the packet open. I scraped the swab against my cheek, the sensation rough and unpleasant. It felt like I was officially cataloging myself as evidence in my own crime. I handed the damp swab back to her, and she carefully snipped the end off into a tiny, sterile plastic tube, which she labeled JS with a permanent marker, my own initials. It made it real. Then she turned her attention to the main event. She switched on a single gooseneck lamp at a workstation, creating a small, intense pool of light in the overwhelming dark. She laid out a clean glass slide and, with the delicate precision of a surgeon, used a pair of fine-tipped tweezers to pull the single strand of Julian Vance's hair from the baggie. It looked so fragile, a sliver of dark gold under the bright light. "There," she murmured, pointing with the tip of the tweezers. "That's the root, the follicle. That's where the best DNA is." My breath hitched in my throat as I watched her work. She used the tweezers and a tiny scalpel to meticulously scrape the microscopic bit of tissue from the base of the hair into another small tube. Every movement was economical and sure, a stark contrast to the frantic chaos churning inside me. I felt like I was going to sick. This was it. The point of no return had a sound, and it was the scrape of steel on glass in a silent laboratory in the middle of the night. With both samples prepared and labeled, Maya led me to the back of the lab, to a machine that took up half the wall. It was a sleek, white behemoth, a wall of humming, blinking machinery that looked more like a prop from a science fiction movie than a piece of university equipment. "The sequencer," she said, her voice filled with a kind of reverence. She typed a rapid sequence of commands into an attached keyboard, and a panel on the machine slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a tray with hundreds of tiny wells. She placed our two small tubes into a centrifuge, which spun them with a high-pitched whine. Then, after adding a few clear liquids from other vials, she used a micropipette to transfer a minuscule drop from each of our tubes into two of the wells on the tray. She looked at me. "Ready?" I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. She hit another key. The tray slid back into the machine with a definitive thud. A series of lights on the panel began to blink in a complex rhythmic pattern, and the low hum of the sequencer deepened into a steady, industrious whir. We stood there in the dark for a long time, just watching the blinking lights. The fuse I had lit in the coffee shop had reached the powder. The bang was no longer a possibility, it was a process, humming away inside a $1 million machine, breaking my life down into a sequence of A's, T's, C's, and G's. The adrenaline began to seep away, leaving behind a cold, hollow dread. We had done it. We had broken in, we had prepared the samples, and now the answer was being assembled, molecule by molecule, in the belly of that machine. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "It'll take about 24 hours to run the sequence, then another day for me to analyze the raw data. There's nothing to do now but wait." We slipped out of the building as silently as we had entered, melting back into the misty, pre-dawn gloom. But the silence was different now. It was no longer empty. It was full of the sound of that machine, humming and whirring, patiently piecing together the truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The walk back to my dorm was a blur. The mist had started to burn off as the sky bruised from black to a deep, washed-out purple. The world was waking up, but I felt like I was being put to sleep, submerged in some thick, viscous fluid of dread. At the entrance to my building, Maya stopped. She looked exhausted, the skin under her eyes shadowed and thin, but her gaze was steady. "I'll text you," she said, her voice low. "As soon as I have anything. Try to get some sleep." I nodded, the motion feeling disconnected from my body, as if I were a puppet and someone else was pulling the strings. She gave my arm a quick, firm squeeze before turning and disappearing into the nascent dawn, leaving me alone with the humming of the sequencer still echoing in my bones. I didn't go to my dorm. I couldn't face the quiet emptiness of my room. Instead, I walked home, back to the small apartment I shared with my mom, moving like a sleepwalker through the slowly brightening streets. I let myself in as quietly as I could, my key barely making a sound in the lock. The apartment was still and dark, smelling of lemon-scented cleaner and my mom's lavender laundry detergent. It was the smell of my entire childhood, and tonight it felt like an accusation. I peeked into her room. She was asleep, curled on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek. Her breathing was a soft, rhythmic whisper in the silence. For a long moment, I just stood there in the doorway watching her. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the cataclysm I had set in motion. A wave of something hot and painful washed over me, a toxic cocktail of guilt, love, and a fierce, desperate protectiveness. I was doing this for her, I told myself, repeating the words like a mantra. But watching her sleep, it felt like the most profound betrayal. I backed away, closing her door with a barely audible click, and went to my own room. The shoebox was still under my bed. I didn't need to check. I could feel its presence, a dense, dark weight pulling the whole apartment down into the earth. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I went to a lecture I don't remember, staring at a professor whose words dissolved into meaningless noise before they could reach my brain. Every buzz of my phone sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system, making my teeth ache. I'd snatch it up, my heart hammering against my ribs, only to see it was a notification from a class forum or a junk email. The world felt thin and unreal, like a badly projected film. The faces of my classmates, the taste of the coffee I forced myself to drink, the drone of campus life, it was all happening behind a thick pane of glass. My reality had shrunk to the size of a single blinking cursor on a computer screen in a locked lab across campus. A cursor that was methodically spelling out a truth that would either set me free or utterly destroy me. I was a ghost at my own feast, and the waiting was a physical poison, seeping into my muscles, making me twitchy and sick. When my mom got home from her shift that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a blank page in my notebook. She came in, smelling of the hotel's expensive, generic air freshener, and dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. "Hey, honey." Her voice was tired. "Long day?" I managed a nod. "You look pale. You feeling okay?" I told her I was just tired, that I'd been up late studying. It was the easiest lie in the world, and it felt like swallowing shards of glass. She started making dinner, her movements efficient and familiar as she chopped vegetables at the counter. "You'll never guess who checked in today," she said, her back to me. "That actor, Julian Vance." My blood went cold. I felt my grip tighten on the edge of the table, my knuckles white. "Oh yeah?" I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "He's even more handsome in person," she continued, a wistful, almost girlish note in her voice. "And so polite. He asked me if I needed a hand with my cart." She laughed a little, a soft, breathy sound. I didn't say anything. I just watched her, this woman I had known my whole life, and realized I didn't know her at all. She was a stranger, dreaming of a movie star, while the evidence that could shatter that dream was being processed a few miles away, all because of me. The next day was worse. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a raw, frayed anxiety that left a metallic taste in my mouth. I skipped my classes and just walked, for hours, my phone clutched in my hand like a talisman. I walked until my feet were sore and my mind was numb, trying to outrun the frantic thumping of my own heart. I ended up at a park overlooking the city, sitting on a cold bench as the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and pink. I knew it had to be soon. The sequencing would be done. Maya would be analyzing the data. Any minute now. Every passing second felt both infinitely long and terrifyingly short. Then it happened. My phone vibrated in my palm, the buzz unnaturally loud in the quiet air. I looked down. The screen was lit up with a new message. It was from Maya. My breath caught in my chest, a painful, sharp thing. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stared at her name, at the single, unread notification that held my entire world within its glowing rectangle. My thumb hovered over the screen, a millimeter of air separating me from the answer. The world had gone silent. The birds in the trees, the distant traffic, the frantic beating of my own heart, it all faded away into a dull, high-pitched ringing in my ears. The air felt thin, insufficient. I was looking at a locked door, and I knew that on the other side, my life was waiting, either intact or in a million irreparable pieces. With a shaking breath, I tapped the notification. The message was short, devoid of any emotion, just 3 words. Meet me. Lab. I didn't run. It felt more like falling, a controlled plummet back through the darkening streets, the campus lights smearing into long, wet streaks of color. My mind was a vortex, pulling in every memory, every doubt, every stray glance from my mom. What if it was a match? What if it wasn't? Which was worse, to be the secret daughter of a movie star, a living, breathing scandal? Or to be nobody, the daughter of a ghost, with my mom's madness laid bare as just that, madness. The lab was dark, except for a single cone of light from a desk lamp illuminating Maya's face. She looked up as I entered, her expression somber. The humming was gone. The sequencer sat silent, its work complete. The quiet was more terrifying than the noise had been. She didn't say a word, just swiveled in her chair and gestured to her computer monitor. I walked towards it, my legs feeling like they were moving through deep water. On the screen were 2 columns of complex data, scrolling strings of letters and numbers that meant nothing to me. But I didn't need to understand them. My eyes were drawn to the bottom of the page, to a small, unassuming box of text, a summary, a conclusion. It contained a name, Liam Caller, and my own anonymous sample number, and beneath them, a single, stark sentence. Paternal match probability, 99.999%. The world didn't explode. It just deflated. All the air rushed out of the room, out of my lungs. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing, the sharp corner digging into my palm. It was real. It wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a delusion. It was a statistical certainty. I don't remember leaving the lab or the walk home. The next thing I knew, I was standing outside the door to our apartment, the key cold and heavy in my hand. The knowledge was a physical weight inside me, a dense, hot stone in my gut. I let myself in. My mom was in the living room, sitting on the floor, surrounded by baskets of clean laundry, folding my t-shirts with the same gentle, methodical care she always had. She looked up and smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Hey, you're just in time to help me with these sheets." And that's when I broke. Not with a shout, but with a whisper. "Liam Caller," I said. The name just fell out of my mouth, an alien sound in our small, quiet apartment. Her hands stilled over a pillowcase. The smile vanished from her face, replaced with an expression I had never seen before, a terrifying, fragile combination of fear and shock, and a grief so profound it seemed to carve new lines around her eyes. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. She just looked at me, and in that look, I saw everything. The years of secrets, the lonely hope, the quiet, crushing weight of it all. Slowly, she got to her feet and went to the small wooden chest where she kept old photo albums and documents. Her hands were trembling as she pulled out a faded, dog-eared manila envelope. She brought it back and sat on the couch, patting the space beside her. I sat down, a chasm of unspoken history between us. She opened the envelope and slid out a single photograph. It was of her, 20 years younger, her hair longer, her face bright with a kind of unguarded happiness I'd never seen. Her arm was linked with a young man with a familiar, impossibly handsome face, his smile wide and easy. They were standing on a beach, the ocean roaring behind them. It was him. And looking at my mom's face in that picture, I finally understood. The shoebox wasn't a collection of trophies from a disturbed fan. It was a map of her heartbreak. Each labeled baggie wasn't a creepy souvenir. It was a dead end, a failed prayer, another man who wasn't him. She had spent 2 decades searching not just for any father, but for the right one, for him. We sat there for a long time in the quiet, the unfolded laundry forgotten around us, the truth finally exposed and breathing in the air between us. I finally had the answer I'd been searching for, but it only created a bigger, more impossible question. I have his phone number. My mom got it from his hotel file years ago, a final, hopeful souvenir. It's sitting in my phone right now, a string of digits that could change everything. So what would you do? Let us know in the comments.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.